Hi, welcome to Sabbath School Daily, where we have been studying from this lesson right here, God's Mission, My Mission. This week we're studying from lesson number 11, which has the title Mission to the Unreached, Part 2, and today is Wednesday's lesson, which has the title Send Her Away. Today's lesson uses the story of Peter's vision found in Acts chapter 10 to give us more light into what we talked about yesterday, the story of the Syrophoenician women. But before we actually go there, I'd like to read for you the first paragraph of our lesson today because it is extremely deep and it's going to help us into understanding the other two stories. Look at what it says. In the unreached neighborhood of the cities, there are many who long for hope. During Christ's time, what prevented God's people from bringing hope of the Messiah to such foreign cities as Tyre and Sidon? Nationalism, pride, and prejudice blinded God's people to the opportunities to see those nearest to them who longed for the hope foretold by the prophecies of the first advent. Today in the cities, there are many population groups with whom Jesus Christ wants his people to share the blessed hope of the second advent. And just as Jesus didn't care what their nationality or race was, neither should we. This was a lesson that the disciples took quite a while to understand. In the account of Acts chapter 10, where we have Peter sitting down for dinner and then falling into a vision the Lord is giving him about a blanket of animals that the Lord tells him to kill and to eat, that is precisely what God is working with his disciple. You see, Peter, as a good and obedient reader of the Bible, would never kill those animals and eat them because they were unclean. One thing that I've explained in the past is the context of the story. Now, while I don't want to go too deep into this because it's not really the point of what we're talking about, this story has nothing to do with the abolition of God's laws regarding health, regarding what meats we can and we cannot eat. Those are still valid, friends. Health does not change. Thousands of years can go by, human health remains the same. So what is happening here is a distinction between the words common and unclean. You see, Peter and the early Christians that were coming from Judaism still had the prejudices that they always had regarding Gentiles, where they could not interact with them, they could not touch them, they could not go into their household, or otherwise they would be seen as unclean, because these people were seen as unclean. And so here in the story, what God is teaching Peter is what Peter himself tells Cornelius later on in verse 34 and 35, where he says the following. Then Peter opened his mouth and said, "In truth, I perceive that God shows no partiality, but in every nation, whoever fears him and works righteousness is accepted by him." God shows no partiality. Again, that's something that we talked about yesterday and the day before. God does not show partiality. To him, we are all one. All passive of salvation, all heirs of salvation. And what Peter had to understand, what the disciples had to understand, what the church had to understand, is that God did not show partiality. Now, going back to the story of the Syrophoenician women, that's exactly what Christ was trying to teach his disciples. They had said, "Send her away." Why? Because they did not see humanity in her. They saw her as an inferior human. But what Jesus is trying to teach them is that God shows no partiality. And that's why in this story, Jesus very publicly praises her faith and demonstrates that faith in him can come from anyone, anywhere. The last paragraph of today's lesson says this. Jesus patiently taught his disciples who did not yet fully understand that God's great plan of salvation was for the entire human family, not just one nation or rural ethnic group. The Holy Spirit can help us to overcome our prejudice and bias in order to complete our mission to the cities. You know, years later, Peter still hadn't quite understood. In the book of Galatians, we see Paul calling him out because he was again acting with hypocrisy. He was eating with the Jews and he was not sitting with the Gentiles. Friends, we are called for all. We are called to minister to all, especially in our world today that is so divided by all sorts of racism, all sorts of prejudice. We are called to bridge those gaps. We are called to unite people under the banner of the cross. Doesn't the book of Ephesians say that we are called to put on the sandals of peace? What does that mean? That means that wherever we walk, wherever we go, we're called to be peacemakers, to bring peace to a world that is divided by hatred. That is our mission. That is our calling. Our God is a God of restoration. He is working now to restore what was lost in Eden, and one day, very soon, that will happen completely. But until then, we are still called to bring peace to this broken world. May the Lord bless you and create in you the spirit of a peacemaker. I'm sure that he will do so if you only make yourself available. Don't forget to study your lesson. Read these verses. Contemplate on the points that are being made here in the lesson today. That will help edify you and create in you this heart the Spirit. Also, remember to comment down below with any questions or any comments. I'd love to interact with you. And please remember to like, to share, and to subscribe to our videos. We release one every day. And I hope to see you again here tomorrow for another Sabbath School Daily.